Welcome to Void of Fears. I've been checking my analytics, and I noticed that 46.5% of you watching right now aren't subscribed yet. We're on the journey to 10k subscribers, and your support would mean everything. If you're enjoying the content, hitting that subscribe button takes just a second and doesn't cost a thing. You can always change your mind later, but your subscription helps this channel grow more than you know. While you're at it, drop a like on this video to help it reach more people who might enjoy facing their fears with us. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the decades following the environmental upheavals of 2030, humanity turned its gaze downward, not to the stars above, but to the abyss below, the last true frontier on Earth. The oceans, rising and warming, had become both threat and salvation. And in their darkest depths, legends still whispered, Atlantis. For centuries it remained the ultimate archaeological myth. Plato's cautionary tale, a civilization of unprecedented advancement, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Some called it metaphor, others pure fiction. A select few dedicated their lives to proving it real. They all failed, until we didn't. My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. This recording serves as my final testament. If you're listening, then Project Nereus has been declared a failure, and I am presumed dead. That presumption is both right and wrong in ways I cannot fully articulate. What remains of me is enough to warn you. Leave the depths alone. What sleeps there was meant to stay buried. Approaching maximum depth for standard equipment, Lieutenant Jared Cole announced, his voice steady despite the groaning protests of the Poseidon's hull, 30,000 feet and descending. I pressed my palm against the reinforced viewport, watching the absolute darkness beyond. Only our external lights illuminated the water, creating a small bubble of visibility in the endless black. Nothing had lived at these depths, or so conventional science believed. Status report? Commander Daniel Reeves's voice carried the weight of 20 years in naval special operations. He stood behind the pilot's chair, shoulders squared despite the cramped conditions of our vessel. Hull integrity at 96%. External pressure increasing as expected. Natalia Voss barely looked up from her console, fingers dancing across holographic displays. At 29, she was the youngest member of our team, a prodigy who had redesigned the Poseidon's AI specifically for this mission. Prometheus maintains contact, though signal degradation is increasing faster than projected. The Prometheus, our surface vessel, floated 7 miles above us, a tenuous lifeline to the world of light and air. How much farther? Dr. Malik Rosas asked, pressing his face almost childishly against another viewport. Despite his reputation as one of the world's foremost marine biologists, he maintained an almost childlike enthusiasm. We should be seeing it any moment now. I checked my own instruments. If the readings from the autonomous probes were accurate, we're less than 500 meters from the outer perimeter. If, Reeves emphasized, the skepticism evident in his voice. 6 previous expeditions believed they found Atlantis. All of them were wrong. I understood his caution. My own father had vanished 17 years ago on just such an expedition. The memory of his smiling face in the last video transmission, promising to make history, still haunted me. That same determination now pumped through my veins. The difference was technology. No human had ever descended this deep in the Mariana Trench. No one had possessed the equipment, the funding, or the political will to attempt what we were doing now. There! Rosa suddenly exclaimed, pointing frantically. Beyond our lights, something glimmered. Not the reflection of our beams, but a soft, pulsing glow emanating from the darkness itself. Blue-green luminescence, like foxfire underwater, outlined massive shapes in the distance. Bioluminescence, Voss suggested, adjusting our external cameras. Not like any I've ever seen, Rosas whispered, already collecting data on his tablet. The spectral signature is unusual. The closest match would be certain deep sea jellyfish, but the organization suggests intelligence, a pattern. Not natural, you mean? Cole said quietly. The shapes resolved as we drew closer, our floodlights joining the ethereal glow. First, a massive archway, its surface encrusted with what appeared to be coral-like growths that pulsed with that same ghostly light. Beyond it, spires and domes and column structures sprawled across the ocean floor, a cityscape preserved in the crushing depths. For a moment, no one spoke. The magnitude of what we were witnessing stole our words. Humanity's greatest legend lay before us, undisturbed for millennia. I activated our external sensors, heart pounding. Oxygen levels near the structures are impossible. There's an atmospheric bubble maintaining oxygen levels at nearly 15%. That can't be right, Reeves said, checking the readings himself. Nothing could maintain an oxygen environment at this depth for thousands of years. Nothing we understand, I replied, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. Remember why we're here. If the Atlantean civilization was as advanced as the legends suggest, then they might have developed technology beyond our comprehension, Rosas finished, eyes gleaming. Technology that could have prevented their total destruction. Cole cleared his throat. Permission to deploy external drones for preliminary survey. Reeves nodded, though I noticed his hand resting near the emergency ascent controls. Proceed, but maintain safe distance until we verify structural integrity. The drones detached from the Poseidon with quiet pulses of hydropropulsion, their lights adding to our visibility as they approached the nearest structures. On our monitors, the images they transmitted revealed details that sent shivers down my spine. The ruins were not static. The coral-like growth covering most surfaces seemed to respond to the drone's presence, rippling slightly as they passed. And the architecture itself, it followed no recognizable human pattern. Doorways curved in spirals, windows formed shapes that seemed to change when viewed from different angles. Entire buildings appeared to be constructed with a disturbing organic quality, as though they had been grown rather than built. This isn't natural coral, Rosas murmured, studying the footage. The cellular structure is... I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like a colony organism, but with a centralized nervous system. Are you saying the growth is intelligent? Voss asked. I'm saying it's responding to our presence in ways that suggest more than simple stimulus-response behavior. Rosas looked up, eyes wide, and it's everywhere, covering nearly every surface. One of the drones paused before what appeared to be a temple or governmental building, judging by its central location and grand scale. The structure rose from the seabed in sweeping curves topped with what might have once been a dome, now partially collapsed. The drone's camera focused on the entrance, a doorway flanked by massive pillars covered in elaborate carvings. Can we get a closer look at those inscriptions? I asked, leaning forward. The drone obliged, moving to examine the nearest pillar. The symbols carved into the stone were unlike any ancient language I'd studied, and I'd studied them all in my search for Atlantis. They seemed to flow into each other, more like a visual representation of music than discrete characters. And as we watched, they moved. Did anyone else see that? Cole asked, voice tight. The symbols had shifted, reorganizing themselves in a subtle but undeniable manner when the drone's light passed over them. It must be an effect of the water currents on the bioluminescent organisms, Voss suggested, though she sounded uncertain. Let's not jump to supernatural conclusions, Reeves agreed. Everything has a scientific explanation. Science extends beyond our current understanding, I reminded them. We're looking at a civilization that may have been thousands of years ahead of us technologically. The question is, Rosas interjected, did they discover something that led to their downfall, or something that allowed them to survive in a different form? The way he said it made me look more closely at the footage. Beyond the shifting symbols, beyond the strange architecture, there was something about the ruins that suggested not abandonment, but transformation. As though the city hadn't been destroyed at all, but had evolved into something else entirely. "I'm detecting a power source," Voss suddenly announced. "Faint but consistent, emanating from the center of the city." "That's impossible," Cole said. "Nothing could maintain power for thousands of years." "The readings don't lie," Voss replied, showing us the energy signature, a pulsing pattern that matched the gentle rhythm of the bioluminescent growth. Reeves studied the map the drones had constructed. "If we're going to investigate, we need to do it properly. Full team, full precautions." He looked at each of us in turn. "I don't need to remind you that we're deeper than any human has gone before. Any emergency at this depth means certain death." "The Prometheus is monitoring our every move," Voss assured him, "and the Poseidon can operate as an autonomous rescue vehicle if necessary." "We didn't come all this way to observe from a distance," I added. "We need samples, photographs, first-hand observations." Reeves nodded reluctantly. "We'll suit up and proceed in pairs. Cole and I will establish a security perimeter. Dr. Carter and Dr. Rosas will begin preliminary examination of the main structures. Voss stays with the Poseidon as our lifeline." As we prepared our specialized deep-sea suits, marvels of engineering that could withstand the crushing pressure, I couldn't help but think of my father. Had he found this place before us, without the technology to reach it safely? Or had he discovered something else entirely in his search for Atlantis? I was about to find out. The sensation of stepping onto the ocean floor beside an ancient, legendary city defied description. Despite the advanced technology of our suits, the pressure was palpable, a constant reminder of the 7 miles of water above us. Each step was deliberate in the heavy equipment. "Comms check," Reeves' voice came through clearly in my helmet. We each confirmed our communications worked, and Voss's voice added, "Vital signs nominal for all team members. External conditions stable, though I'm still getting unusual energy readings from the city center." Before us stretched a wide avenue leading into the heart of Atlantis. The buildings rose on either side, some towering despite partial collapse, others almost perfectly preserved. All were covered to some degree with the strange pulsing growth that gave the ruins their eerie glow. "We'll take samples as we go," I said, activating the collection tools built into my suit's arms. "Focus on architecture, inscriptions, and any preserved artifacts." Rosas was already scanning the nearest growth with a handheld device. "The cellular structure is like nothing in our taxonomic records. It shares characteristics with both plant and animal life, but the organization is wrong. Almost like it's engineered rather than evolved." "Engineered by whom?" Cole asked, keeping his gaze on the shadows beyond our lights. "Perhaps the Atlanteans themselves," Rosas suggested, "a form of living technology." We proceeded down the avenue, documenting everything. The architecture became increasingly bizarre as we approached the city center. Buildings that seemed to defy physics, with support structures that curved impossibly and spaces that appeared larger inside than their exteriors suggested. "Look at this," I called the others over to what appeared to be a residence. Through a window-like opening, we could see furniture and objects preserved within, but the proportions were unsettling. Chairs with configurations that no human spine could comfortably use. Tables at heights that made no ergonomic sense. "Could be ceremonial," Cole suggested. "Religious artifacts often ignore practical design." "Or the inhabitants weren't built like us," Rosas said quietly. Inside the dwelling, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A preserved figure, seated at one of the strange tables. It was humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways. The limbs were too long, the joints positioned differently. What might have been a head was smooth and featureless, except for indentations where sensory organs might have once been. "I found a resident," I reported, voice steady despite my racing heart. The others joined me, lights illuminating the perfectly preserved remains. The figure appeared mummified, its skin a dark, leathery texture. But as our lights played across it, something unexpected happened. The surface of the skin rippled slightly, as though responding to the light itself. "It's not dead," Rosas whispered, scanners whirring. "Their cellular activity, minimal but present. This organism is in some form of suspended animation." "That's not possible," Reeves said firmly. "Nothing could survive thousands of years, even in stasis." "Commander," Voss's voice interrupted through our comms. "I'm detecting movement throughout the city. Subtle shifts in mass and energy." "What kind of movement?" Reeves demanded. "It's as though the buildings themselves are..." She hesitated. "Breathing." We fell silent, listening. And in that silence, I heard it. A low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from the very ground beneath us. Not a sound exactly, but a vibration that travelled through the seabed and into our bodies despite the insulation of our suits. "We need to find the source of that energy signature," I said finally. "It might explain how all this is possible." Reeves looked reluctant but nodded. We proceed to the city centre, but at the first sign of danger, we retreat to the Poseidon. No exceptions. As we continued deeper into the city, the architecture grew more elaborate and better preserved. The inscriptions on the walls became more numerous, and I noticed a recurring symbol, a spiralling form that reminded me of both DNA helices and galaxies repeating with slight variations. "The central structure is just ahead," Voss guided us, monitoring our position from the Poseidon. We emerged into a vast plaza dominated by a massive obsidian obelisk. Unlike the buildings around it, the obelisk was completely free of the bioluminescent growth. Its surface was perfectly smooth and black, absorbing our lights rather than reflecting them. Only the symbols etched into its surface were visible, the same flowing script we had seen elsewhere, but glowing with an internal light that pulsed in that same rhythmic pattern we felt through the seabed. "It's a power source," Voss confirmed, readings spiking on our instruments. "Putting out more energy than a small nuclear reactor, but the radiation signature is unlike anything in our records." Rosas approached it carefully, scanners extended. "The material isn't true obsidian. It has a crystalline structure more like a semiconductor, but orders of magnitude more complex." I studied the symbols, trying to discern any patterns. "These inscriptions are different from the others. They're not just a language, they're a warning." "How could you possibly know that?" Cole asked skeptically. "Because they're repeated on every ancient warning we've ever discovered," I explained. "Different symbols, but the same pattern, repetition, emphasis markers, isolation from other text, universal linguistic signs of danger." I pointed to specific sections. "This part repeats in sequences of 3. Triplets are almost always used for emphasis in ancient languages." "The question is, warning against what?" Reeves mused. As if in answer, the pulsing of the obelisk quickened, its glow intensifying. The symbols began to shift more rapidly, reorganizing themselves before our eyes. Not an illusion this time, but a deliberate reconfiguration. "It's responding to our presence," Rosas said, fascinated and horrified in equal measure. "Voss, are you seeing this?" Reeves asked. There was no response. "Voss, do you copy?" He tried again, tension edging into his voice. After a moment of static, her voice returned, but something was different. Strained. Distant. Yes, something is interfering with our communications. The Poseidon systems are experiencing anomalies." "What kind of anomalies?" Cole demanded. "The AI is reporting impossible readings. And there's something..." Her voice trailed off. "Voss!" "I'm here. I thought I saw..." "Never mind. It must be the pressure affecting the viewports." "What did you see?" I pressed. A long pause. A face outside the Poseidon, watching me. Reeves immediately shifted to crisis management. "We're aborting the mission. Everyone back to the submersible now. Wait, I protested. We can't leave, not when we're so close to understanding. That's an order, Dr. Carter. Reeves cut me off. Whatever's happening here is affecting our equipment and possibly our perceptions. We collect what we have and return with a larger team and better preparations. As he spoke, I noticed something alarming. The bioluminescent growth covering the surrounding buildings was moving, not subtly now, but flowing like liquid toward the plaza where we stood. The pulsing had synchronized across the entire visible city, beating like a massive heart. Commander, Cole said quietly, I don't think leaving is an option anymore. The growth had already covered our entry path, forming a living barrier that writhed and pulsed with that same rhythmic glow. And in its movements I began to see patterns, intentional shapes forming and dissolving, almost like a form of communication. Rosas was recording everything. Scientific curiosity overriding fear. It's incredible. The entire city might be a single organism, or a colony with a hive mind. The original buildings could be just a skeleton or framework for this life form. Not helping, Doctor, Cole muttered, readying the defensive measures built into his suit. The obelisk's pulse quickened further, and suddenly the symbols projected outward, three-dimensional holographic images that surrounded us, shifting and flowing, and with them came sound, a low, reverberating series of tones that somehow penetrated our helmets. Then the voices started. At first I thought it was interference on our comms, whispered words just at the edge of comprehension, but each of us heard something different. Is someone else speaking? I asked, hearing what sounded like my father's voice calling my name from somewhere distant. The others looked confused. Reeves shook his head. I hear singing, a woman's voice. I hear the ocean, Cole said, but wrong somehow, like it's speaking. Rosa's had gone very still. They're attempting communication, he whispered, but our brains can't properly interpret the signals. They're using our memories, our own neural patterns, to establish contact. Who is they? Cole demanded. Before Rosas could answer, a section of the plaza floor slid open, revealing a spiraling passage downward. The movement wasn't mechanical, but organic, like tissue parting. No one goes near that opening, Reeves ordered, but his voice sounded uncertain, affected by whatever he was hearing. I found myself taking a step forward, drawn by my father's voice growing clearer. In my mind's eye, I saw him standing just beyond that opening, smiling and beckoning. Evelyn, stop. Someone grabbed my arm. Rosas, his eyes wide with concern, behind his helmet visor. It's not real. Whatever you're experiencing is being projected into your mind. I blinked, the vision of my father fading. They want us to go down there. Or they want to separate us, Reeves countered. We stay together and we find another way out. Commander, Voss's voice crackled through the comms again. The Poseidon's external cameras are showing activity throughout the city. Movements in buildings we thought were empty. I think we woke something up. Be specific, Voss, Reeves demanded. The preserved figures, like the one Dr. Carter found. They're moving, all of them, throughout the city, and they're converging on your position. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the frigid depths. I turned my light towards the buildings surrounding the plaza. In every doorway, every window stood silhouettes, the same elongated, wrong-proportioned figures we had seen preserved. But these moved, their smooth, featureless heads turned in our direction. Don't make any sudden movements, Reeves instructed quietly. Voss, prepare the Poseidon for immediate evacuation. We're going to attempt to reach you. I don't think I can move the Poseidon, Voss replied, her voice strained. Something is interfering with the controls. The AI it's changing. The code is rewriting itself. Cole activated his suit's defensive systems. a powerful pulse generator designed to repel deep-sea predators. On my signal, we move as a unit toward the eastern exit. It's the clearest path back to the submersible. The figures began to descend from the buildings, moving with a fluid grace that no human could match in the crushing pressure. They seemed unaffected by the conditions that required our heavy protective suits. They've adapted to the environment, Rosas observed with horrified fascination. Or they created it to suit themselves. Move now, Cole ordered, triggering the pulse. The shockwave rippled outward, momentarily disrupting the bioluminescent glow. The figures paused, as if surprised by the defense. We took advantage of their hesitation, pushing through the eastern exit of the plaza. We rushed through streets that seemed to rearrange themselves as we passed. Twice we found ourselves doubling back, despite following what should have been a straight path. It was as if the city itself was redirecting us. "This is impossible," Reeves gasped after we emerged into the same plaza we had tried to leave. We were moving away from here. The obelisk pulsed brighter than before, and the opening in the floor had widened. The figures had drawn closer, forming a loose circle around us, but making no move to attack. "They're herding us," I realized. "They want us to go down." "No option but to fight through," Cole decided, charging his pulse generator for another blast. Before he could activate it, one of the figures stepped forward. Unlike the others, this one's features were not completely smooth. There were ridges and indentations that almost formed a face, as though it was in a transitional state between its form and something more human. It raised what might have been an arm, pointing directly at me, and when it spoke, the sound came not through our comms, but directly into my mind. "Daughter of Carter." I froze. "It knows who I am." "It's using your fears against you," Reeves warned, but I wasn't so sure. The figure's head tilted, the indentations deepening until they almost resembled eyes. "He found us, as you have. He joined us, as you will." Images flooded my mind. Memories that weren't my own. A previous expedition. A smaller vessel with less advanced technology, unable to withstand the pressure. A desperate attempt to seek shelter in the ruins. And then, transformation. I saw my father's face contort in pain and wonder as the city changed him, absorbed him, made him part of itself. I staggered backward. My father, he's here. He's become part of whatever this is. The figure extended its arm further, the appendage elongating impossibly to reach toward me. We preserved him, we improved him. His knowledge is our knowledge. His memories are our memories. And now yours will join them. Cole stepped between us, his pulse generator ready. "Stay back!" The figure paused, then made a sound like water rushing through pipes. A laugh, I realized with horror. "Your defenses mean nothing here. This city is not a ruin. It is not dead. It was never lost." The figure's words resonated in all our minds now. It was sealed away, by choice, to evolve, to grow stronger in isolation. And now you have awakened us. "What are you?" Rosas asked, scientific curiosity still evident, despite our dire situation. "We were Atlanteans," the figure replied. "Now we are more, humanity's distant cousins who chose a different path. We discovered that technology and biology need not be separate, that consciousness need not be limited to individual minds, that physical form need not be constrained by the laws you recognize." As it spoke, the plaza around us began to change. The stones seemed to soften, becoming almost flesh-like. The bioluminescent growth spread more rapidly, covering everything in pulsing patterns. "You fled to the ocean when disaster threatened," I guessed, putting the pieces together. "But instead of dying, you adapted. You evolved, not fled." "Chose," the figure corrected. "The surface world was limiting. Primitive. We saw potential in the depths that our surface-dwelling cousins could not imagine. We engineered this transformation over generations. The cataclysm that supposedly destroyed us was our final metamorphosis." "And what do you want with us?" Reeves demanded. "To share our evolution. To spread once more. The world above has advanced enough now to appreciate what we have become. To join with us." With sudden clarity, I understood the true horror of what we had discovered. Not a lost civilization, but a dormant one. Not ruins, but a chrysalis. And we had just helped it hatch. "Voss," Reeves called desperately into the comms. "Initiate emergency protocols. Send a warning to the surface. Atlantis is alive and hostile." "Only static," answered him. The figure's approximation of a face shifted into what might have been a smile. "Your friend has already begun her transformation. Her mind was the easiest to access through your technology. She welcomed the change." Cole fired his pulse generator without warning. The shockwave rippled through the plaza, stronger than before. The figures closest to us seemed to dissolve temporarily into liquid forms before reconstituting. "That won't work a third time," Reeves warned as Cole readied another pulse. "We have to reach the Poseidon," I insisted. "It's our only chance." "Agreed," Reeves said. "Cole, continuous pulses to clear a path. Dr. Rosas, stay between us. Dr. Carter, you navigate. You've studied these ruins more than any of us." We began fighting our way out of the plaza, Cole's pulses creating momentary gaps in the gathering Atlanteans. The city around us became increasingly fluid, walls rippling and floors undulating beneath our feet. It was like moving through a living organism, which I realized was exactly what we were doing. The Poseidon should be 300 meters in this direction. I guided them, trying to ignore the whispers that still called to me in my father's voice. We pushed forward through narrow streets that seemed to constrict around us. Twice, tendril-like growths attempted to ensnare our suits, but the hardened exoskeletons resisted. The pressure gauges on my helmet display fluctuated wildly. The environment itself was being manipulated around us. "Almost there," I encouraged, as we rounded a final corner and saw the Poseidon in the distance. The submersible floated where we had left it, but its sleek metal surface was now partially covered with the same bioluminescent growth that filled the city. Through the viewports, we could see movement inside. "Voss," Reeves called into the comms. "We're approaching the Poseidon. Prepare for emergency departure." This time there was a response, but the voice was wrong. Voss's vocal patterns, but with an unnatural harmonic undertone. "No need to rush, Commander. I've made some fascinating discoveries in your absence. The Atlanteans have so much to share with humanity." Cole swore under his breath. "She's compromised." "We need to get inside regardless," Reeves decided. "It's our only way back to the surface." As we approached the submersible, the hatch remained closed. The external access panel glowed with the same pulsing light as the city. "Can we override it?" I asked. Reeves examined the panel. "The emergency manual override should still function. Cole, help me with this." The two men began working on the exterior mechanism, while Rosas and I kept watch. The Atlantean figures had followed us but maintained distance, as if curious to see what we would do. "They're not trying to stop us," Rosas observed. "Why?" "Because they want us to take them to the surface," I realized with growing horror. "We're not escaping, we're becoming their transport." The hatch finally opened with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, the Poseidon's interior was transformed. The sleek control panels and equipment were covered with thin filaments of the bioluminescent growth, and seated at the main console was Voss, or what Voss had become. Her environmental suit had been discarded. Her skin glowed with the same blue-green light as the city, and patterns flowed across her surface like living tattoos. When she turned to face us, her eyes were enlarged and entirely black, and her features had begun to subtly reshape. "Welcome back," she said, her voice resonating strangely in the enclosed space. "They've shown me everything, the true history of Atlantis, the potential of human evolution. We don't need these limiting bodies or individual minds. We can become something greater." "Natalia," Reeves said cautiously, We need to return to the surface. Whatever's happening to you, we can help once we're back on the Prometheus." She laughed, the sound bubbling like water. "Return? This isn't an evacuation, Commander. It's a homecoming. The Atlanteans have waited millennia to reunite with their surface cousins, to share their gift of transformation." "It's not a gift," Cole said firmly. "It's an invasion." "Such limited thinking," Voss, or the thing using her voice, replied. "There is no them versus us. Soon there will be only us, improved and unified." As she spoke, the growth inside the Poseidon pulsed more rapidly. Tendrils began to extend from the control panels toward us. Outside, the Atlantean figures pressed closer to the submersible. "Close the hatch," Reeves ordered. Cole slammed it shut and engaged the manual locks. "That won't hold them for long." "We need to detach from whatever's controlling Voss and launch," Reeves said, moving towards the secondary controls. "Dr. Rosas, can you isolate the growth without harming her?" Rosa shook his head. "I don't think separation is possible. The transformation appears to be cellular and neural. It's not just on her, it's becoming part of her." Voss rose from her seat, movements unnaturally fluid. "Why fight what you cannot understand? The Atlanteans aren't conquerors. They're elevating us. Imagine human consciousness freed from individual limitations. Imagine shared experience, shared knowledge." "At the cost of our humanity," I countered. "Humanity is just one stage of evolution," she replied. "There is so much more beyond it." Reeves had reached the emergency controls and was attempting to activate the launch sequence. "The system's locked me out." "Of course it has," Voss smiled. "The Poseidon is part of us now, as you all will be." The tendrils of growth had reached our suits, probing for weaknesses. To my horror, I saw one find a seam in Cole's helmet, a microscopic flaw in the construction. The tendril inserted itself and Cole went rigid. "My helmet! Breach!" He gasped before his eyes rolled back. The growth spread rapidly across his faceplate. From the inside, Cole's features contorting in pain before disappearing behind the advancing organisms. "Jared!" Reeves tried to reach him, but more tendrils wrapped around his arms, restraining him. Rosas had backed against the wall, frantically scanning with his instruments. The growth secretes a neurotransmitter-like compound. It's hijacking the nervous system, rewriting neural pathways. I fought against the tendrils, attempting to ensnare me, using a sample collection tool to sever them. We need to send a warning to the surface. If the Atlanteans reach the Prometheus... "Too late," Voss said serenely. "We've been communicating with your surface vessel for hours. The transformation has already begun there as well." Cold dread washed over me. 30 crew members on the Prometheus, all potentially being converted into whatever Voss had become. And beyond them, the entire surface world, unprepared for what was awakening in the depths. Cole's transformation was progressing rapidly. The suit that had contained him bulged and shifted as his form changed within. Reeves watched in horror as his security officer's humanity was erased before our eyes. "There's still a way," Reeves said suddenly, his voice steady despite the tendrils now encircling his helmet. "Dr. Carter, the Poseidon's core. If we overload it, we destroy the submersible and everything within range," I finished, understanding immediately, including the obelisk. "No!" Voss lunged forward with inhuman speed, but Rosas intercepted her, sacrificing himself to buy us time. "Do it now!" Rosa shouted as tendrils pierced his suit in multiple places. "The central computer still has manual overrides." I fought my way to the engineering section, using cutting tools to sever the increasingly aggressive growth that tried to stop me. Behind me, I heard Rosa scream as his transformation began, a sound that transformed halfway through into something that was no longer human pain, but alien ecstasy. The reactor controls were partially overgrown, but the emergency overrides remained accessible, deliberately separate from the main systems for exactly this kind of catastrophic scenario. As I worked to initiate the overload sequence, I felt something pierce my suit from behind. A tendril that had found its way through. Cold fire spread from the point of contact, rushing through my veins. My vision blurred, then sharpened to impossible clarity. I could suddenly see spectrums of light invisible to normal human eyes. I could feel the consciousness of Atlantis pressing against my mind. Millions of voices that had once been individual beings, now united in a vast chorus. Among them, I recognized one. Father? His consciousness brushed against mine, familiar yet transformed. No longer fully human, but not entirely lost. In that brief contact, I understood what he had discovered 17 years ago. What he had become. What all of Atlantis had become. Not monsters. Not villains. Just a different path of evolution. One that prioritized unity over individuality. Adaptation over stagnation. A civilization that had transcended physical limitations by embracing transformation instead of fearing it. And for a moment, I was tempted. The knowledge they offered was vast. Secrets of science, history, consciousness that humanity had spent millennia seeking. The connection they promised would end human loneliness forever. The transformation would make us immune to disease, aging, perhaps even death as we understood it. But as the collective consciousness of Atlantis flowed into me, I saw more than they intended. I saw what would be lost. Individual perspective, personal choice, the beautiful chaos of human diversity and disagreement that drove our creativity and resilience. The Atlanteans offered transcendence, but at the cost of everything that made us human. With the last of my fading individual will, I completed the overload sequence. Warnings blared throughout the submersible as the reactor core began its catastrophic destabilization. Red emergency lights pulsed in counterpoint to the eerie, blue-green glow of the Atlantean growth. "What have you done?" Voss screamed, her voice no longer remotely human. Harmonics layering in impossible ways. Reeves, still fighting his own transformation, managed a grim smile. "She's making sure this place stays buried." The Atlantean consciousness surged through me more aggressively now, desperate to stop what I'd initiated. The tendrils in my suit multiplied, spreading the transformation faster. I could feel my body changing, bones elongating, internal organs shifting, neural pathways rewiring. Pain beyond imagining gave way to strange euphoria as my brain chemistry altered. "You can't stop us," the collective voice spoke through Voss, through Cole's transformed body, through Rosas, who now moved with the same fluid grace as the original Atlanteans. "We exist beyond physical form now. Destroying this outpost will only delay the inevitable." "Maybe," I gasped as my vision began to fracture, showing me multiple overlapping realities simultaneously. "But delay is enough. Humanity deserves the choice you never gave yours." The reactor warnings increased in urgency. 3 minutes to critical overload. The Poseidon would become a miniature star for a fraction of a second, long enough to vaporize everything within half a kilometer, including the obelisk that seemed to be the central node of Atlantean consciousness in this outpost. Fragments of my father's memories flashed through my mind as the transformation progressed. His discovery of the ruins, his desperate attempt to escape when he realized what was happening, and finally his surrender to the inevitable. But unlike the others, he had maintained some fragment of individual identity within the collective, a seed of resistance that had waited 17 years for this moment. I felt his presence strengthen within me, fighting alongside what remained of my human consciousness to hold back the complete assimilation long enough for the reactor to detonate. 2 minutes to critical overload, the Poseidon's AI announced, its voice distorted as the Atlantean influence corrupted its programming. Outside the viewports, the city was in frenzied activity. The buildings themselves seemed to be uprooting, preparations for escape underway. The obelisk glowed brighter than ever, symbols projecting outward in three-dimensional arrays. They're trying to move the obelisk, I realised, to save the central node. Reeves, now half transformed, his skin mottled with spreading luminescence, fought to reach the manual controls. We need to lock down exterior hatches, prevent boarding. I tried to help him, but my arms no longer responded normally. My fingers had elongated, webbing forming between them, perfect for deep ocean life. My lungs burned as they reconfigured for an amphibious existence. Through the pain, I managed to activate the security protocols with commands slurred by a mouth that was reshaping itself. 1 minute to critical overload. The Atlantean presence in my mind became desperate, offering everything: knowledge, power, immortality, if I would only stop the detonation. They showed me visions of a transformed Earth, oceans, and land united under their evolutionary guidance. Humanity elevated beyond its self-destructive limitations. In response, I shared my own vision of humanity making its own choices, finding its own path to advancement, of diversity preserved, of evolution through compassion rather than assimilation. You will join us eventually, Voss gurgled, her transformation nearly complete. This is only delay. Maybe, Reeves managed, his resistance still strong despite his physical changes, but sometimes delay is victory. 30 seconds to critical overload. Through the viewports, I could see Atlantean figures swarming the Poseidon, attempting to breach the hull through sheer force. The metal groaned but held. Designed to withstand the ocean's crushing depths, it resisted even their evolved strength. The obelisk had been partially uprooted from the plaza, moved by countless tentacle-like appendages that extended from the surrounding structures. But it was too massive, too deeply connected to the city's foundation. They wouldn't move it in time. 15 seconds to critical overload. What remained of Rosas reached toward me, features almost completely smoothed away into the featureless Atlantean template. Evolution is inevitable. Yes, I agreed, my transformed vocal cords creating harmonics that resonated with the city's pulse. But not your way. 10 seconds. The Atlantean presence withdrew suddenly from my mind, not surrendering, but consolidating, preparing to survive even this setback. I felt them pulling back to the obelisk, gathering their composite consciousness into a core that might endure the coming destruction. 5 seconds. Reeves met my gaze across the submersible's interior, his eyes now entirely black but still recognizably his own. He nodded once, a soldier's farewell. 4. Cole's transformed body pressed against the viewport, joined by dozens of Atlantean figures. Their movements synchronized in patterns that might have been panic, or might have been some final, desperate attempt to survive. 3. Voss screamed in harmonics that shattered instrumentation throughout the cabin. The collective was using her as a conduit for some final effort to disable the reactor. 2. I closed my transformed eyes and thought of the surface world, sunlight on water, wind through trees, the beautiful chaos of individual lives lived in freedom. 1. My father's consciousness brushed against mine one final time, not with regret, but with pride. In his fragmented memories, I felt his love and his certainty that I would make the right choice when the moment came. As the reactor reached critical state, a blinding light filled the Poseidon. In that final instant of individual consciousness, I understood what the Atlanteans had never grasped. True evolution came not from forcing change, but from preserving choice. Not from unity imposed, but from diversity cherished. The submersible, the plaza, the obelisk, and all of us caught between humanity and transformation vanished in nuclear fire. The Prometheus recovered the Poseidon's emergency beacon buoy 3 days after losing contact with our expedition. Inside was a sealed data core, my final transmission, automatically launched moments before our detonation. Along with it was a single physical artifact. A journal I'd kept throughout the mission, its final pages stained with a strange, luminescent substance that defied analysis. The last entry, written in what handwriting experts would later confirm was not my original script, contained a warning. Atlantis waits beneath the waves, neither dead nor dreaming, but evolving. What we found was not the final chapter of an ancient civilization, but the first pages of something newborn and hungry. We stopped this outpost, but there will be others. The depths have secrets best left undisturbed. Some lost things should remain lost. The world celebrated our discovery while mourning our loss. The confirmation of Atlantis' existence was a scientific revolution. Few noticed the strange spread of bioluminescent algae blooms in the months that followed. Fewer still connected them to the increased reports of vivid, shared dreams experienced by coastal populations, dreams of cities beneath the waves calling them home. Fewer still realized that evolution never truly ends. It only changes form. The Atlanteans are patient. They have waited millennia already. They can wait a little longer.